Welcome back to Shine In and Out, the space where science meets soul. I'm your host, Sammy Stoltz, biomedical researcher and life coach, exploring the meeting place between biology, psychology, and shared humanity. Today, I'm so excited to welcome Elizabeth Morrow because we're living in a moment where the Great Divide isn't just political, it's personal. It's at our dinner tables, in our friendships, and even in our nervous systems. People nowadays can't sit together at Thanksgiving without feeling the tension under the surface of disagreement. We seem to have traded curiosity for certainty in our own beliefs, and it's tearing at the fabric of our communities apart. My guest today, Elizabeth Morrow, believes that we can stitch it back together. She's a political leader, a TEDx speaker, and the author of the Civil Graces Project, The Pursuit for Common Ground. Her work reminds us that civility isn't about being polite. It's about being brave enough to listen and keep an open mind. In a time when outrage feels easier than empathy, we're going to talk about how grace, humility, and compassion can become acts of quiet revolution. So let's jump in. Okay, we got to talk about the science. So let's talk about the neurobiology of this division. When we argue, politics, identity, anything, our brains don't interpret it as a harmless debate. In fact, your amygdala interprets it as danger, sounds the alarm, and then your sympathetic nervous system fires and puts you into fight or flight. The same thing that you would be feeling if you're being chased by a tiger. Once that happens, the prefrontal cortex, which is the part of the brain that regulates empathy and logic, shuts down because you're saving energy to get away from whatever is there to harm you evolutionarily. And that's why reasoning rarely works when your tempers flare back and forth. The body has to feel safe before the mind can open. And when we hear things that aren't in line with our own beliefs, automatically the body shuts off. So emotional safety is a precursor for civil discourse and truth. So keep this in mind that we need to do that as well. Yeah, I finished it on the plane ride home, and I was like, I need to text her and get her on the show right away because I truly feel like it's exactly what the world needs to hear. So thank you for being here, Elizabeth. Welcome.
I'm so happy to be here. And it's so funny because you asked me, how did I get here? And I think it's life takes you down these different paths and you never know how they're all going to make sense. But I'm now in my early 50s and I'm looking back and it's starting to come clearer. I was one of 12 kids and I was in an instant community. So I was the 11th of 12 kids. And the biggest thing that about my childhood was that we always had to come together at the table at the end of the day. That was just a requirement. And whether we were getting along or not, we had to come together and everybody had their little assigned seats. And that stuck in my mind. But it wasn't just that. It was when my older siblings were in college, they would bring home their friends who were from around the world. I mean, I think about all the people that were at our table. I think sometimes we had like 20, 25 people at our table just because it was a hotbed. It was really, you could add leaves to it. It was this long oak table and it was my great grandmother's table. And so you can make it bigger or smaller depending on what you needed. But we used to get together and like the neighbor kids and my friends from school would all want to come to our house because it was all full of family all the time, because there were generations of relatives living around and it just was always a place where people would drop by. And I always dreamed that I would have that kind of house. But we really don't do that anymore because I live over here on the East Coast and have done so for the majority of my life. So we go and meet at places, but we don't often get people to come to our house and come to the table. So I have made a conscious effort to do that.
Which is how
my husband and I did a lot of fun. Yes, exactly. My husband and I did a lot of fundraising. And at one point, it became apparent that my background in public policy and political science was needed because it was 2017. A lot was happening in the world. And I had always had this call to run for public office and do public service, but I kept kind of shoving it aside thinking, that's not a fun, why would you put yourself through that, right? But it became apparent that it was time that I needed to do that. So we sat down and discussed, and he said, you should run for president. And I'm like, no, I don't think so. He was just being nice. But I said, what if I ran for U.S. Congress? Because at the time, Pennsylvania had no women in Congress. And having 8 brothers, I was like, I know what's going on here. We don't have a voice. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring and run for Congress. And where I lived was one of the most gerrymandered districts in the country. If you look at the old Pennsylvania 7, the joke was it looked like Goofy kicking Donald because it was so distorted. It was this crazy shape. And I ran, but I didn't have money. So I had to find ways to meet people. And I love people. So we just got in the car and literally I drove the full 5 counties and just talked to people all the time. And we took pictures and I listened a lot. And the thing that was the thread was that there is so much that we share in common. And if you're not from Pennsylvania, it may not make sense, but Lancaster County, which is a part of the district, it's all farms and a lot of like mom and pops. And then you keep going across Chester County, it's the horse country. And then you go in Delaware County and get closer to Philadelphia. It's a really strong working community. Houses are close together. And then you go up into Berks County and then Montgomery County. They're all so different. And you had all these different ways of living in this one little district, and yet people were talking similar things. And I said, it's really weird because all I keep hearing on the news is that we're divided. And yet that's not what I'm seeing. Even if we disagree on the issues, we could sit and talk about it and come to an understanding that we don't have to agree to get along, right? So the race ended a year later because the districts were declared unconstitutional and they created fair districts. So the Supreme Court came and said, no, these are not fair districts. We're going to redraw the districts. So my district of 5 counties got chunked up into fair districts, which is great. It was what I was campaigning for. But it was like an expensive game of musical chairs, and I lost my chair. There was no race for me to run in. And I remember feeling that sense of, I've got all this data, talked to all these people. I loved what I was doing. Now what? And it was shortly thereafter that we heard a lot of people talking about, oh, we're drifting to civil war. And I said, people make money off the fact that we're divided, and they're making money. Like they're trying to get us to divide. What we need is not, I was like, it was breakfast and I was just so frustrated. I said to my husband, I said, what we need civil grace. And he said, that's a great title and you should do something with that. So the Civil Graces Project was born as a way for me to kind of weave all those themes together and to try to figure out, why did I go through all that? How can I connect people so that we don't drift into this great abyss of being divided? And I love the cover. I'll show you the cover. It is instrumental. And we all have a unique personality, which is displayed in our fingertip. But if you have the courage, which is the French word for of the heart, we can find that space right there where we connect. And that connection, that third way, is actually an ancient ideal. Vesica Piscis is what some call, it's a mathematical thing too, where the Venn diagram, all these overlaps. Part of everything, it's in nature. And there's so many ways where this is true, where when you and I come together, it's not you and I, it's the space in between. And there's a third entity there. There's a third way. And there's
always
an opportunity for us to move away from the division that now we're really hyper divided, they say. I still believe we're closer than ever. We've just been told so many times that we're divided that we start looking for that rather than looking for ways that we're connected. So I have a cafe. That was the next thing, is that from the book came the cafe, because chapter 1 is hospitality, and it's about bringing people to the table. And so it's that ideal that I had from my childhood about bringing people back to one another. And it's not always easy. Sometimes people get mad and disagree, but we don't have to hurt each other, and we don't have to call each other evil or bad or whatever. And to me, it's about shifting. Okay, maybe today's not our day for hospitality, but then just go be grateful. Go be great. Go sit outside and go be grateful, because that will shift things for you too. Or go be inspired, because that is another one. And So that's kind of how it came to be. And we live it every day at the Centerville Place in Centerville, Delaware, so that everybody has a place at the table.
I don't know if you know, but I grew
Long
up
story.
in Wilmington.
Yeah.
So I used to go before school to your cafe. I have great memories there and even better ones more recently, especially meeting you. So that beautiful
Oh, it was
story. I
awesome. It was so
love the
great. Yeah.
symbolism. Absolutely. I have to ask, are these your fingerprints or yours and someone else's?
It actually was. I found a fingerprint and clip art, I gotta confess,
Okay. Okay.
and took the one and then overlapped it to make that symbol. To me, it could be anybody's. But there's so many
Yeah.
personal stories in the book that is my gift. And I honestly said to my husband, when you do something like this and you're not doing it to be like, I don't know, you're not doing it to show off or whatever.
Yeah.
It's like your baby's out in the world and you're so nervous about how people are going to receive it. And one of the chapters that as I was writing it, things would happen in the context of what was going on in the media or whatever. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, I don't want to come off as someone who thinks she knows it all, because this is very much something we all have to live. And I would keep tweaking it to try to make it inviting and inclusive. And that's what I always say, is that this is not a book of answers. This is a book of my trying to live the questions and to try to figure out, how do we live a life more connected to each other? Because it's way more fun. And, we're human. We don't do it right all the time. Sometimes we screw up. But I think the sadness that I experience in life is when people walk away and say, you know what, I'm not even going to try anymore. And that, yes, sometimes has to be done for people's mental health. If relationships have gotten too trying and too hard, I get that. But if there's an opportunity, forgiveness is one of the things in there, as one of the civil graces. If there's an opportunity to give things time and space and then maybe move into that space, it's not about letting the person off the hook, but it's about, as I'm trying to remember who it was. I think it was
It's
Wayne
just as
Dyer
much
said,
for
not
you.
drinking poison.
Yes.
Yeah, it's just as much for you as for them, but it's like not drinking poison, hoping it hurts the other person. So there are things that this is, as much as it is about holding the world in a different space, it's about holding yourself in grace so that you have the strength to stop judging your own self and stop inflicting that sense of that you have to be perfect all the time.
That's beautiful. You're right. And I've kind of learned that on my own journey, because I used to think, oh, I wanted to come across as optimal to other people, but then when people would be vulnerable in front of me, I would only feel love and I would gravitate toward them. So I was like, okay, well, I want to be the person that shows people that they can be vulnerable, and creating that space is entirely different. But I wanted to show you because I flipped to a random page. This is your baby, and I clearly loved her. I put hearts everywhere, underlined a bunch of things. I put my own notes. I probably looked like a madwoman on the plane. And there's a, what are they called? The like shared little libraries in my neighborhood. One of the houses had one, and I was about to put it in there, and I was like, no, I'm going to order a new one and put it in there because I need to keep this.
That's great. That's so great. I love that. Because it's got to be spread, and it's got to, I sent one, it's so funny. I've learned a lot about publishing books when I did this, because the reason they get to be, New York Times bestsellers is they wait and sell them all on one day. I was just wanting to get mine out there as fast as I could. So I was mailing it to everybody, but this is all during COVID. And so all I was like is, please don't get this package in the mail and think, it's not, you can't open it. But I sent it to the Vatican. I sent it to the White House. I sent it to Oprah. I sent it to Heather Cox Richardson. I was just like, anybody I thought who had the airwaves, because I'm like, please, 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 somebody please help us not go down this road where we are going to be divided and hurt one another and head toward a civil war, because that to me would be such a devastation. What a waste for us to move in that path when you just do a quarter turn and look to your right and look to your left and say, how can we change this? And how can we, and that's where we're really powerful. And if this side and this side don't want to change, go find more people. There's how many billions of us on the planet? And I was just listening to Simon Sinek this morning, who said what keeps him going is the belief in the good. And that's what keeps me going. A lot of times people, like, I'm in politics and people say, oh, you got to be tough and you got to be contrasty and mean. And it's just not my style. And that is not who I am. So I think the heart is one of the toughest muscles in our bodies. And I know it is a physical organ, but I think we have come to know it also as a bigger thing. It's where we direct the heart chakra and our energy of love. I think there's so much we can do to try to heal our communities, even just little things like you go first and at the grocery store, or, not trying to kill each other on the highway, to slow down. And I think there's so many little things that don't cost anything that we can all be doing.
Absolutely. You never know. You never know the impact that you're having. I've had people at the grocery store that I just unconsciously smile at, and they will like beam like nothing else. And I'm like, wow, I'm so glad you needed, like, you must have needed that, And they'll start telling me their whole life story. And I'm like, great, keep it coming. Like, it is beautiful. And if you're looking for the good, you will find it. And if you're looking for things that you have in common with people, you will absolutely find them. Everybody wants to be happy. Everybody wants to be loved. And if you look at the science of what's going on in your body and in your brain when you're hearing an opinion that differs from yours, it makes sense why people react the way that they do. You're in fight or flight automatically because your brain takes it as a threat. But if we can remind ourselves of that it's okay, that's my biology trying to protect me, but I want to be here and I want to be present and I want to listen and I want to learn, because you can always learn even if you don't agree. Then we're all at the table and we're talking and we're smiling even if we're disagreeing. I think that's what it should look like.
That's what they call, like, I used to be in real estate sales, and I used to tell my agents it's that lizard brain, they call it, where it switches into fight or flight, but that's our prehistoric thing that kept us safe from, the saber-toothed tiger. But if we take a breath, because the larger cortex of our brain takes longer to catch up, that's why breathing is so important, is because it allows you to then move into that different, deeper process of cognitive thinking. So I love that. That is so spot on.
Yeah. You gotta, like, as long as you're aware of it, then you can do something about it. If you're just caught in that emotional fear and physical, because your nervous system is responding, I don't blame you, but I would like you to change how you handle it. That's how I feel. So I would love for you to give a little synopsis on the whole of the Civil Graces, just so that people can get a glimpse of what you're trying to teach here.
So it's a book of 20 graces, and they are all based on, I did a lot of research and a lot of contemplation and meditation to try to figure out, why did we come together in the first place? We are there's a book, A Nation Born in Rebellion is always going to have a little bit of what we've got going on right now. It's Jill Lepore's book, These Truths. But why did we come together in the first place? And how are we moving toward that more perfect union? Because we have had these moments in history where we have been divided at each other. And it hasn't just been one or two, it's been ongoing. So how do we take what brings us together and what brought us together and use the language that might have been there in the 18th century, like in the 1770s, when they were thinking about forming this democracy called America? And I use the etymology of the word from back then, not now, because now when I say courage, you think it means we're brave. Back then, it meant it came from your heart, from the full heart. Confidence was not that I can do it all. It was with full trust. And they went more literal on words. So I went through the meaning of the words way back then to kind of dissect a new direction. And one thing I invite people to do is find, like, your north, south, east, and west. Find 4 words that are your guiding point, so that if you're in the space of despair, or if you're in the space of feeling like you've been attacked, you go back to one of these graces and let it hold you, because these aren't new concepts, but the grace carries us forward. And it's not, the idea of grace is not something that's necessarily spiritual, but it has been used in spiritual traditions. But I like to see it kind of as the life force that connects all of us. And so each chapter talks about my life experience and some of my stories along the way, but it also is a conversation. It's meant to be a conversation with the reader. And the end of each chapter are questions for you to engage in. And then there's space at the back for you to add your own civil graces, because this is not an all-inclusive list. This is just the beginning. And so I very much see it as a project that people can use through all of their lives and all of their relationships, at work, at school, at the cafe. We use it. And one of the things we do once a month at the last Sunday of each month is, after the cafe closes, we have a little civil graces meeting, and we come together. Everybody brings a snack so that we're still fed. We talk about how can we make our communities better. But then we don't just talk, we take action. Like right now, we're raising awareness for the fact that maybe people are food insecure, or have, like, some of the kids didn't get all the supplies they needed for school. So we're doing a collection for that. And then in November, we're focusing on the civil grace of gratitude. It's thanks and giving. So it's looking at what you have, no matter what your life circumstances are. If you're hearing my voice, you got something to be thankful for. So I think we all have a lot to be thankful for. Look at what you have, give thanks, but then also maybe see what you can let go of to give to somebody. Make a contribution in a way that's meaningful for you. And then on the next meeting, we'll talk about what did that feel like to do that. Then December, which will get us to the end of the year, is about inspiring. And the actual word inspiration means to take a breath, and to inspire, is in our current understanding, is to be the light in the world for other people to see. So we're going to focus on, during the darkest time in the Northern Hemisphere of the year, to how can we be the light in our community, and how does that feel? And just to shift the narrative from the constant stream of information and misinformation we're getting to, let's bring it local. Let's bring it back to each other. And here's a cool thing that I've learned in my research. When human beings are within 12 feet of each other, their hearts start to beat together because of the electromagnetic fields that surround
Wow.
each of us. And I just think science is on our side, even to
Oh, yeah.
bring us together. So I inspired by that.
Yeah. I mean, the way that we evolved so beautifully as a
Mhm.
species has a lot to do with how we were communal. I think, individually, yes, we're, a brilliant species, but I think the reason why we've made it so far and built this society is because we did it in collaboration. So absolutely, I think our bodies totally reward us for being around people, and we know that you live longer if you have, loved ones that you're spending time with.
Mhm.
I mean, the science is there, absolutely. And I love, 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 love how you break down the language, because I just find language to be so beautiful, because it's so powerful, but it's also limiting, right? And when you
Yeah.
define the words for yourself, it's really helpful, I think, because people have their own image of all of these words, the connotation, right? So when I think of grace, for some reason, there's like a visual of like two people talking, and they accidentally like start talking at the same time, and then one person just like steps back and is like, go ahead. For some reason, that's my grace, like letting everybody, listening to everybody, letting everybody be themselves, and holding space for them to be their full selves.
That's such a powerful thing to do. And it's such a hard thing to do. I mean, at least for me, I grew up in a family of 12 kids. And so I grew up like talking on the freeway, like trying to find an inch to get in so that you could. We had all these older siblings who were saying all these great things. And it was always like, hey, what about me? So I really consciously try to work with the art of listening, because it's transformative. And the more I listen, the more I'm amazed and the calmer I feel, because there's so many opportunities for us to get the last word. And it doesn't it doesn't necessarily do anything. It sometimes is like, maybe we shouldn't have said that last word. And so I'm learning as I go through the civil graces, even myself, for things that, you know, they teach me every single day.
That's so awesome. That's so awesome. And to live by what you're teaching is obviously the best way to teach. I'm curious how you form the distinction in your own conversations about these topics that people might deem difficult. How do you separate the
It's
being
yeah.
agreeable versus the accountable version of yourself?
It's hard because like I'm in a political field now because I'm running for office in the state of Pennsylvania. And that space is so much. It's like starts off with a negative kind of connotation that you got to attack each other, somebody's going to win. And I don't want to do that. I want to say, this is who I am. May I be of service? And I'll let you talk about your thing. But then when you get all these consultants and everybody in and they, the polls say this and you're too soft and all that, it's so hard to hold that space in that environment. But I really think it's exactly what we need right
Yes.
now. I would love to go set a big table in Washington and say, get your butt at the table and let's have dinner. Because they used to do that. They used to have dinners and they used to talk to each other. And one of my friends is a senator in the U.S. Senate. And he says they actually were going to have a dinner. And I said, I'm so inspired to hear about that. I said, why is that never in the news? Because those things, I think, would give us hope that maybe our leaders are not at each other's throats all the time. But fear sells. And so when you're in that space and you're in the space of contrast, oh my gosh, that sells. And it's like, how can you get the scoop on somebody and like make them totally embarrassing? I don't want any part of that. And I'm trying to recreate the way we do what we do to just be more mindful of that we are supposed to be leaders. And so in that space, it's like kind of entering the arena that Brene Brown, she quotes the man in the arena, which is a Teddy Roosevelt, I think, quote. That when you're in the arena, it's one thing for everyone else to judge you, but you're in there and you're taking all the shots and all the chances that entails. And so trying to stay mindful of practicing what I preach is really something that's on top of my mind all the time. And even I've managed in other businesses, but managing a restaurant, it's one of the hardest things I've had to do because it's just a different culture altogether. And to try to hold the space and try to realize that this is not it's hard sometimes. Things expire and there's no way there's so many moving parts. And then prices have been going nuts with all the things that have been happening and people don't show up for work. And, it's just so weird that space versus a corporate environment where everybody has, there's not that structure. And so it is teaching me to, again, soften my edges and realize where can grace help me through this.
That's such I have the imagery too, because it's not as maybe succinct and put together as a corporate environment. Maybe it's more chaotic, but it's also so warm and it's real. And that's what people want. And I think you're so right when I was thinking about what you said, that in our daily life, there's not actually a prevalent divide, but in our media, there absolutely is. And I try to stay off of social media because I don't think there's anything personally good that I could get from it, aside from, of course, knowing what's going on in the world. But in my daily life, I've never had a conversation that ended in a screaming match. I've never had anything like that. And I think people are scared to have things like that. So now they're not talking. And you said that we can save the world by first examining our own lives. So how do you propose that people start, even if it's maybe just observing that there isn't that much polarity in their daily life?
I think it's the duality exists in life, in everything. For every day there's a night and everything has a counterpart. And like my first marriage was really challenging and yet it was one of my best teachers. being a parent. I wasn't perfect. And I know that now looking back with wisdom, I wish I would have been, not so worried all the time, because when you have these little kids in a world where there was so much going on as they were growing up, I couldn't even imagine what it's like to raise kids today because of
I'm
all the
worried.
stresses that are on families.
My kids haven't
It's
even been
like,
born
I
and
don't
I'm
know how
worried.
people do it. Well, it's just because you love so much and you feel like your heart is walking around in these little people, and there's that fear of what happens if, and instead of being in
Oh,
that space, I wish I would have been more in the joy of the moment, because it went so fast. And it
yeah.
wasn't that I didn't have had a lot of fun being a mom, but it's like looking back where the hard parts were. I had a choice to look at this situation with love or fear. And in
Yes.
the times that I didn't choose love and I chose fear, it's like I had to learn that that's not ideal. And even in friendships, let's take it off to friendships, the things that happen between people and in relationships. How many of those things are fear or things that we heard from somebody else or heard on social media or through the
100%.
grapevine and all this stuff? And how much of that is real? And so I think this is about, my husband and I talk about our second act, because our kids are grown and we're in this space now where it's like, what do we do with the rest of our lives? Because we're on that other slope where it's not going up anymore. It's going, into the final chapters. And I don't mean to say that as morbid, but for me, it's exciting, because going up and trying to learn all these things, that's so much work. And then when you can recognize that while you may not have had it all together and, things fell apart, you've learned from every single experience of your life, even the losses. And one of my favorite things that came about from running for public office, and I talk about it in the book, was my son said, "Mom, thanks for teaching me how to fail and to keep going." And I'm like, I wasn't even trying to teach him that. I was just trying to survive a political campaign and all the chaos that happened because I tried to do that. And then to understand where they were coming from when I went to do it again, when I went to run again, that they were like, "Why are you doing this again? Because last time was so bad." But to find the grace to get through and to continue to hear the summon of your calling. I think everybody
Exactly.
has a calling to do something, and you have to sometimes have the courage, even when it doesn't make sense, to take one step in that direction and to see the next step might not show up right away, but you have to keep leaning into it. Because for me, sitting back on the sidelines is just not something I want to do with my life. And if having conversations like we're having here, Sam, is if this conversation is heard by one other person and they're like, "Hey, I'm going to go talk to someone," this conversation meant something to somebody,
That's what
but
I say. It's a
it doesn't
ripple.
have to. Yeah, it doesn't have to go and be like, we dream of these big things. Like, I mean, I would have loved for that book to go nuts, but it was written in a time when the country was home in isolation. And so it's calling you to come out of that isolation and get back to each other. And it was written 5 years ago. So now maybe that message is ready to be received. And it's just about being patient. The analogy that I think about all the time is like, if you have a really pretty rose bud, you don't sit there and go, "Oh, let me help you open up," and try to rip it open. It's got to take its time and open. And sometimes the projects we work on in our lives are that way. And other times they go so fast and you're like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe like this is taking off." So
Yeah,
it's just about
absolutely.
being open to all of it.
Yeah, I think something that I've witnessed, I do a lot of, mindfulness, especially learning from other people what they wish they had done differently, especially like those that are
Mhm.
on their deathbed. Like I always do a thought experiment with myself. Like if I were on my deathbed, would this matter? Or would I regret doing this or not doing this? You know? And I think it taught
Mhm.
me that I feel my purpose tugging at me. Like I actually feel a pull in my chest. And I know that so many people ignore it their entire lives for what is sensible and society tells them to do financially, whatever it may be, security. And that makes total sense. And I
Yeah.
don't blame them for it. But the amount of people that I interview on this podcast that started in one industry and fully like dropped it, like one day they just couldn't handle it anymore. And they were like, I got to do my purpose. So I'm like, you know what? I already have the tug. I know it's not going away because it's been there. And might as well start now and get as much done as I can for the world as possible. So I'm also trying to impart that, like, if you have that tug, you have to go for it. Everybody has this unique experience
Yeah.
of life. Exactly. Like you had this calling to run for office, like even when you were young, right? You said in the book,
Yeah.
like you're like young,
Yeah.
like
It's always
little
been
girl.
there. Yeah. And I've tried to ignore it because of the opinions and thoughts of other people.
Scary.
And it just keeps coming back. Yeah. It just comes
Yeah,
back. And it's
I
not,
tried to
it's
avoid.
about the love of people.
Yeah. Yeah, the spotlight was the exact opposite of what I've ever wanted. I remember having to give a speech as my final in my freshman of high school class, and I would have a panic attack every day after syllabus day, knowing that at the end of the semester, at the end of the year, I'd have to give a speech. And I actually had to get hypnotized because I was having panic attacks so much about that one speech at the end of the year. At the beginning of the year, I was suffering. So to come from that girl to the girl that's voluntarily leaving town tomorrow to go speak at a conference and present my work, I think she would be incredulous. Like she would not even know who I was going out of my comfort zone like that so much. And I think we should all be working to make our younger selves proud. And you've absolutely done that.
Thank you. Well, Joseph Campbell would say that we have to go in those caves where we most fear. The secrets are there. So you're doing that. And it's obviously you're lit up and it's bringing you joy. And I mean, you and I have been trying to talk to each other. I think we've been trying for the last couple of months to connect. And it's so fun when you finally do get to connect with people because to hear, like, to see the joy and to hear what you're doing inspires me too. And I think that is so amazing that you're using your voice to reach out and get people to talk because that is, your mic is so powerful.
Yeah, its name is Mike, actually. I'm just kidding.
Its name is Mike. Yeah. I know. I need to get that equipment. I am like so not equipped with all the new technology. I got to get better about.
Hey, I mean, you sound good to me, but obviously if you're going to do more of these, which I would love to see you do, it's never a bad idea. I could send you the link for mine. It was just an Amazon simple, starter.
And that is cool. I would love that. I would love that because in that area, I could use all the help I can get.
Sure. Yeah, I've done some vetting of all this stuff, so I'm happy to save you the time.
That's so
what was
so
big
let me
for me.
ask you a question.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Oh, no, I was going to ask you a question. I was going to say, what inspired you to just start doing this and to jump into doing a podcast? What was it?
You know what it was? And I actually have never put this into words, but it was dissatisfaction. I was in a place after I graduated school where I was not stimulated. I was not having the conversations that lit me up. And I didn't notice, but I was depressed. And I spoke at this conference on a panel. Actually, it was the International Space Development Conference. I have nothing to do with space, but I was invited and I spoke on the panel and I talked to these students that came all the way from India about, balance and self-care and self-growth and all of those things. And I met so many people there and had so many conversations that on the car ride home, I started bawling because I didn't realize how much I had missed that. And so I was like, I need to pursue these conversations in my daily life. Like, I can't be starving myself of this enrichment. And it's not so easy to just go to the market and find it, right? Yeah. And these are conversations I would love to have anyway. One, it's an excuse to get incredible people to put some time aside to talk to me. But two, like you said, if this reaches one person and teaches them something or gives them a different perspective on how they can live, especially their mindset about how they treat themselves and how they see everything, because that can change everything, then and I've done
Yeah.
it, and I'm ecstatic.
Well, I am so honored to be on your show with you tonight. It's so great.
I'm honored. You called me at work when we were trying to schedule. I was working in the lab, and I was talking to my two friends there, and I was like, I gotta go. She's gonna be a congresswoman.
I was like cleaning up the cafe and I was getting everything together and Vince just walked in. So he says hi to,
Hi, Vince.
but we were racing around. I said, oh my gosh, it's almost 6 o'clock. I got to get home. So it's awesome.
Absolutely. One thing that like really stuck out to me when you were talking is how you differentiated between love and fear. That is something that I preach often because I've done my own thought experiments with it. And I truly think that every emotion can go into love or fear. And even the conditional love of society that like, your love, what are you serving me? That's also fear because you're trying to get something out of it.
Yeah.
So the love is the
Absolutely.
unconditional love. But anytime you're angry, anytime you're scared, like it's all under the umbrella of fear. And anytime you're living from a place of abundance and truly like living your purpose and trying to be your best self and trying to help others be their best selves, that's the love. And so those two things are exactly what I focus on. If I'm not doing something out of fear, I shift it to now I need to do it from love.
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
And I think that's what we both did. I think that's what we both did. I mean, I did not want the spotlight. Like I said, I wanted to shine light on other people, be the lighthouse, not in the spotlight. But now I had this realization because I was writing an essay for a PhD application. And I was like, wow, I really thought I wanted to be the lighthouse. I almost made my logo a lighthouse. But I realized that's selling myself short. I want to be the sun. I want to be like overarching, like people aren't necessarily thinking of me, but I'm changing their lives and they're in this warmth and they feel safe and they're growing and they're energized. Like I want to impact everybody, not just the people who come into my water channel, So
yeah, and
that's,
you know
that's what I'm going for.
The thing about a lighthouse, isn't there big mirrors involved that shine out? That I'm not exactly sure, but I think there are mirrors within the light bulb in the lighthouse that are shining that out. So you're reflecting the light that comes at you as well. So I think there's so many metaphors in what you're talking about.
You're so right. I never thought of that actually. That's what I want to do. I mean that's what,
and you're doing it.
Yeah. And you, I don't think I ever would have put two and two together to differentiate between what I'm hearing and seeing in the news and from other people and my daily life. Like, because that seems like it's the majority, right? Like it's happening everywhere all the time. Clearly everybody's scrolling and seeing all these horrible things. And these families can't, like, I have friends who don't speak to family members, siblings over political views. It like absolutely like tears my heart out that you could let a political view do that to you. So what would you say to those people?
That's the hard part. That's the hard part. Yeah. It's hard when the people that are closest to us, like it's almost like they're reflecting something about us that we don't want to see. But it's also, again, that fear of if they're that way, how does that connect back to me? And I think that's something we struggle with even in this current time and space. As things get hyper polarized, I don't always do that perfectly because sometimes it's like there's the book out there that's Let Them, Mel Robbins' book about Let Them. Sometimes I do a really bad job letting them because it's like, what are you talking about? How can you be thinking this is okay? People are getting hurt. So it's about knowing when to let them from a space of non-judgment and then understanding when do I need to take a stand and talk about what is unjust and what needs to be corrected, because I think it is a balance. We're not meant to just, a lot of times people are like, oh, it's civility is, we can't be civil. It's not about your manners and all that necessarily, but it's about trying to, and like I said, I'm still learning how to do this, hold that space, hold that pause to see what else is trying to come forth in that time. in this
Yeah.
contrast. And this is our slingshot moment. When we get pulled back, my brothers used to have those slingshots with the big rubber band thing. When you get pulled back, you're getting jettisoned forward. And I think where we are today feels like we're getting pulled back in so many ways. But this is our slingshot moment. Where do we want to go? And what
love
kind
that.
of future do we want to see? We have to have that vision because history has taught us that eventually we have to have that answer. How do we want to live together in this time and space, in this moment, 2025 and beyond? And
Yeah,
in
let's get ahead
relation
of
with our
it.
planet, in relation with each other, in relation with all the new technologies that are coming our way.
Absolutely.
Is it going to get harder or easier? I'm keeping an open mind and thinking that, it probably was scary when they got the railroads and the world opened up because of railroads. The world opened up because of the internet. And this is the next frontier. And we have to figure out, I think, a lot of times before we go out, we have to do the inner work for ourselves.
100%. 100%. I feel like one of the necessities in order to have that love that we were talking about, that unconditional, leaving space for people to be their vulnerable, full selves, is understanding. And I think people nowadays aren't striving to understand the other side. They're just shutting down immediately and moving away from that.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was a kid, when people would ask me about my political opinions, I would freak out because as long as somebody could explain their side to me, I would always understand. And of course, now I've developed my own, belief systems, but the open-mindedness is still there. If you can logically explain to me why you believe something, I'll be like, I see the merit in that. But some people have no explanation. They're just like, they read it somewhere and they took it in and glued it to their identity. So learning and being open-minded that you might not be right. And it's not even you that's not right. It's probably an article that you read or an interview that you heard. Absolutely that.
And sometimes people are so tired. They're just trying to get through the day. They're trying to get the kids to the programs or to school or whatever, and they've got parents to take care. I mean, there are so many pressures on us right now that I think sometimes it feels like a luxury to be able to think of things like mindfulness in a world where there just isn't enough time to do the things you have to do just to keep it all going. But it is important, even if for a moment, just to remember to breathe and to give yourself that gift because it is free and it is available for everyone.
I could not agree more. I'm more recently trying to develop do it in the moment. Do any little thing that you can do. Instead of saying, I don't have time to go to the gym for an hour, so I'm not going to exercise today. I've been running the stairs at work, between experiments when I have a 5-minute timer set. I'm running the stairs because I want to fuel my body and I want to feel good, but I don't have the time. So I'm finding loopholes.
Yep.
So in the in-betweens, when your coffee's brewing, your computers loading, taking that time to just have a small breath, the difference that it can make, it compounds. Same thing as parking a little bit further away. You see, you reach your step goals, all of those little things instead of those unapproachable, I'm going to change my entire lifestyle right now and I'm going to meditate for an hour every morning. That's not sustainable.
Right. Yep. That's so true. That's so wise. Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it's easier said than done, of course, but definitely something that I'm working on.
It really is.
So
yeah,
here's a big question.
Yeah.
I'm curious. Say you want to reimagine the American experiment through the lens of the civil graces. I want to hear what you envision when I say that.
Well, I think one of the temptations is to rewrite things the way that we wish they would be, but yet all those lessons that we got along the way from all the things that have happened. And I don't want people to suffer. I wish that there were times when things were easier. I wish that we would recognize how much we have as blessings and that when you give of yourself and you give what you have, that doesn't mean you have less, that there are things that we could be doing so much different. It makes me sick to think about how all the money has gone upward and that the struggle here among all the people who are trying so hard. And it's like, does it ever occur to anybody that at some point in your life, you can't spend all that money? There's a point when money stops making you happier. And it's like, couldn't we just find a way to recognize that no one made it on their own? No one is self-made. And how do we make sure that we, share what we have with one another?
Yeah.
I wish that were different because I think
100%. I've asked that question myself. I would just love to understand, because I understand that the more you have, the more you feel you need to sustain your lifestyle. But there has to be a point where that extra money doesn't do anything for you.
Is.
Like after you even set aside enough for your kids and your grandkids. Like that's, yeah. So I couldn't agree more, and I'd love to shift the narrative on that. So we're approaching an hour. Is there anything you would like to impart upon the audience for the listeners who feel powerless or exhausted by this division? What would you tell them to start doing?
Well,
to make their difference, their ripples?
You are never powerful. Yeah, you are never powerless as long as you hold on to even a shred of hope. And I have to find things. I try to listen to things every morning that give me that sense of hope. There are all sorts of resources like on YouTube, and you get what you think about all day long. So if you feed yourself fear and you feed yourself those types of things, those are the seeds. If you plant those, that's what you're going to harvest. Absolutely. And so you have to make a conscious decision. And I've been through stuff like, I remember when I was a single mom, I was like, how am I going to make this work? I just decided that I was going to. And I would look for the signs. I would look for anything that would just give me, yep, you're in the, like I called it the breadcrumbs, that you're heading in the right direction. And sometimes it's a friend that says something. Sometimes it's you're behind a car and the license plate in front of you says something that triggers something for you. It's just the world is constantly sending us signs and symbols to be in the dance of life. And everybody has a gift inside of them. And that's why I wrote the book, is that I want us all to find a way back to each other and find a way to bring that which is within every single one of us. Can you imagine what the world would be like if we all brought forth the gifts within us and we're supported in that? And that if you talk about restructuring the government, what if a government really stops seeing us as threats to one another and stops seeing us as like these negative influences and sees us as a positive, as a global resource, the human being and what we can bring to one another, that is something I would love to see that world. I'm trying to remember what philosopher said that is when we will discover fire for the very second time, when we get to that space.
It is. I mean, our evolution would be exponential at that point because we're all learning from each other's growth.
We're on the cutting edge.
That's the kind of community I'm trying to build, for sure. Yeah.
Well, you are doing it. You are doing it, Sam. I'm so glad to be a part of it. And I hope you'll continue to share all that you are and just keep beaming your big light into the world, because it is really wonderful to have had this time with you tonight.
Thank you so much. I've been looking forward to this. I can't tell you how long. And I have a feeling that I'm going to find a way to edit this as soon as possible and give the world what it needs to hear. Thank you so much for everything, for making the time, for sharing your message. And I mean, gorgeous, not just beautiful, but gorgeous message to end on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all you do. And let's keep in touch. We've got lots of work to do.
Absolutely. Lots to do. Looking forward to it.
All right, bye.
That was delightful. Thank you so much for being here. Elizabeth. What a pleasure. Civility has been dismissed as weakness, but today and you remind us that it's the opposite. It's strength refined by compassion. The civil graces aren't just abstract virtues. They're a practice of returning to our humanity again. And even when the world forgets we can make that choice for ourselves. Elizabeth reminds us that grace is not the absence of conflict. It's the art of staying kind within it. If polarization is a nervous system in fight or flight, then grace is the deep exhale that brings us home to ourselves and to each other. Because the real revolution isn't who wins the argument. It's in who stays connected and how big and beautiful our communities can be. I'm Sammy Stoltz, and this was Shine In and Out. Until next time, breathe deeply, listen bravely, and remember, peace begins in the body long before it can reach the world. Until next time, keep shining.